everybody. Welcome to our winter quarterly webinar. We're so happy that you're here with us virtually today. This is Sarah Wagner at Chapin Hall. I'm so thrilled to introduce our three guests today who are going to be talking about networking. With us today in the room at Chapin Hall is Jerry Huang. He is the Senior Program Director of Entrepreneurship at the college at the University of Chicago. He's going to be speaking about networking. And then after he speaks, we're going to hear from two graduated fellows. First from Katie Pascal, who is a Cohort 4 fellow. She is a research scientist at Child Trends. And then we'll hear from Megan Hayes-Peel, who is a Cohort 3 fellow. And Megan is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Wayne State University. I'm going to leave all attendees muted throughout the presentation, just so we don't have any weird background sound or anything like that. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask of our presenters, feel free to use the questions box to ask that question, and we'll read off questions at the end. If there's a question that you really want to ask in your own voice, feel free to type that into the question box, and we will unmute you toward the end of the presentation for you to be able to ask that question. So I think I will turn things over to Jerry.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I am very pleased to be here today. Really excited to tell you guys a little bit about networking. It's something that I think is helpful throughout your career. Just a little bit about me. I am the director of the de facto undergraduate entrepreneurship program at the University of Chicago. I also work directly with the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation that does more work with MBA students and graduate students, but also with college students. So if we go to the first slide here, so maybe we just start by just kind of defining what we're talking about. What is a personal network? So the idea of networking actually comes from computer science, where we have different nodes and connectivity between folks. But at the end of the day, we really are talking about, from personal terms, just individuals and humans that you are connected to. So think about your family members, people that you work with, and it could be anyone that you have had interaction with. So it might also include folks from your past, like from high school, or from different elements of your life. So like if you go always have coffee at Starbucks and you know the barista really well, he or she may also be considered part of your network. So the personal networking side of it is in general just the practice of developing and maintaining this network that you have. Everyone has a network, whether or not you understand networking or not. And so today I just wanted to be a little bit more explicit about it and see how this might help you in your future careers. If you go to the next slide, this is actually a visualization of my network as it sits on LinkedIn. So actually, if you ever have the opportunity to go visit at LinkedIn's headquarters in San Francisco, if you tell them ahead of time, they'll build something like this for you off of your LinkedIn profile. What's interesting about it when you visualize it is that obviously my name is in the middle, but it's hard to make out the names and whatnot, but each one of the little points and dots are different people, and you can see the density of how they're connected. So actually the blue part, I believe, are all folks that I know from here in Chicago that work in the tech or entrepreneurship scene. Over on the left is more folks that I knew from sort of the small business scene, like when I was owning a small business in Naperville. And even if you look up towards the top where it says, in the title where it says, what is a personal network? You see that there's a few folks up there. They're actually like folks that I knew from college at Berkeley that I just know, but don't necessarily work in my industry or do anything with me. I think if you go over to the right side in the green, those folks are folks that I have connections with through the Kellogg School of Management, through my MBA. So you can see that, like, you know, even though those people are disparate, what's interesting is they're all connected through me. a platform like LinkedIn, if you use the platform, will actually tell you like if you're connected to different folks. So for example, if you didn't know me, but you wanted to connect with me, you would probably know Leanne or Sarah or Mickey, and then they would know me. So through those sort of like degrees of separation, you could get to me. So just a fun little visualization of what we're talking about. So if we go to the next slide, you know, really, the question is why should I bother with this sort of stuff? Like, you know, Jerry, you've already told me that, you know, I've already got a network. Why do I need to worry about like cultivating it or managing it or whatnot? Well, from a career standpoint and from a professional standpoint, you know, these are kind of the obvious ones. Like, you know, if you want to know about job opportunities, you know, having people in your network looking out for you at different companies or different colleges or higher education places, nonprofits, that's always beneficial. Also, like if you network within, say, a university setting or in a company, you know, those are folks that are going to be talking to you about promotions and different job opportunities and these sort of things. So that's actually one point I should make, is that networking isn't necessarily just with folks that are your peers. It's also with folks that are maybe more junior to you in age or professionalism, but also more senior to you. So you can see that depending on the folks that you know, you may actually become a very helpful person in terms of connecting folks within your network. If we go to the next slide, again, like, but really, like, why at the end of the day do I think you should consider networking and being more explicit about it? I think it's just a way to find out more about folks and be curious. I think it's very akin to you know, being curious about reading books and stuff, just being curious about what's around you and who's around you and what's going to be out there. You know, studies have shown that being curious protects your brain too. It also helps you overcome anxiety in the sense that if you're curious about stuff, that curiosity can get past your anxiety about doing something such that, you know, your brain will force you to go do something. But if we go to the next slide, really what I'm talking about is building relationships, because there definitely are folks, and you can find them on LinkedIn, where they're all about sort of just collecting the business cards and collecting the email addresses and creating a giant list. That is a form of networking, but I don't think that's really all that effective. You may look at my network list, we don't have to go back to it, but if you look at my big picture jumble of network and say like, wow, Jerry, you just must, like, you know, just be collecting these cards and connecting with people's email addresses. But no, actually the reality is I actually personally know everyone on that picture. And I think it's a good practice to connect with folks only if you know them, and if there are some sort of like commonality or curiosity where you can connect with them on a relationship basis. So if we're talking about building relationships instead of just, you know, straight up like what's your name and what's your serial number and where do you work, we can go to the next slide where you know, this is just kind of a laundry list about, like, you know, how do you go about building relationships. So at the end of the day, I think what this really means is, like, how do you as a person show another person that you want to get to know them, right? Whether that be just being friendly, being courteous, being interested in what the person has to say. All of these elements go into starting to build relationships. I always think back to fraternity rush. I don't know if any of you were in the Greek system, but a lot of things that we would do where we meet a lot of new kids, young freshmen who were looking to join fraternities and sororities, were all about, like, you know, getting to know them on a basic level, like where do you live, where you're from, what are you interested in, and then just being persistent in terms of your questions such that you find commonalities and things that you can talk about. In a lot of ways, what we're talking about is, the formative steps of building friendships, but I'm not saying that you need to be, friends with everyone that you have on your LinkedIn list. And actually, this brings up a good point that, there isn't actually a necessity to know all of these things about all of the different folks in your network, because sometimes loose connections are as good as strong connections, and we'll actually get to that in another point. But what I mean by loose connections is, I may know my neighbor because he's in close proximity to me, but they may have not work in my industry, they may not be my age. I have kids, they may not have kids, but I still have a relationship with them because we have proximity. So the point is that there's a lot of different ways to have connectivity, and if you manage it, you can find ways to use those relationships as you go forward. So as we go to the next slide, we've started talking about, but what are the opportunities to network? I don't think you always have to be explicit in terms of hey, I'm going to go to an event and I'm going to network and I'm going to meet 20 people in my industry and this and that. Even in your everyday life of, going to meetings at work, if you ever go to a staff meeting, there's probably someone on the staff who you don't know as well as maybe you should. You never know what other people in that room are doing and how they may be able to help you going forward. One of the things that I try to do, and I don't know if this is a piece of advice, but I always try to think about how I can help somebody else, right? So part of my job is working directly with college students, and a lot of what I do is really just listening to what they are telling me in terms of, hey, I'm looking for an internship in California. Do you know anyone there? And if I do, I will try to be helpful. But also connecting people within my network. So in that example, if somebody asked me, hey, do you know any venture capital investors in San Francisco? Well, I might make that connection based on my relationships with the person asking and the person that I might connect them with. But, other opportunities in network, you might think about, kids activities. If you have kids and you're taking them to sporting activities, well, you may want to get to know the other parents. You never know what industries they're working in. If you go to conferences, a great way to network is, a lot of folks go to the conferences to hear the speakers. Well, after the speaker speaks, go talk to the speaker and, tell them your opinion about, whether it was a good or bad presentation and how much you like or don't like what they're doing. Most people are appreciative, and most people like to get their ego stroked about, how great they are. So you use those elements to your advantage. So if we go to the next slide, where are we here? So one of the things that we've been talking about is kind of at a high level what the benefits are from networking. I do have some numbers, and actually I do have some references at the end where the numbers come from. But one of the big things that jumps out is that 85% of jobs are filled through networking, meaning that either you find out about the job or your resume gets put in by somebody who works there or whatnot. So there really is a big benefit from a career standpoint of networking. Further, if we dig a little bit further, 40% of people who were surveyed said they were referred to the new employer by someone who actually worked there already. So, 40% of folks are saying that, I got my job because I connected or knew someone who worked at the company before I even got there. Another interesting tidbit is that people are actually more likely to be referred for jobs, not by their first degree connections, so people that they know directly, but by second and third degree connections. So what that means is that you all may know Sarah, but it actually may be someone that Sarah knows that is going to help you find your next job. So even though you don't know that person, Sarah knows that person, and that person is going to be helpful to you. That's why people, I think, get excited about something like a tool like LinkedIn, because LinkedIn really does help you sort of visualize this, and in the past, only sort of the experts would even think or know to do this now. Now you can go look on LinkedIn, and you can see that Sarah is connected to Jerry, so and Jerry works at the University of Chicago, so if you wanted to learn something about entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago, you could go through Sarah and get to me, and further and further. So going to the next slide, just a quick note for people who have, a preference for being an introvert or have some social anxiety. A lot of what we're talking about is not asking you to sort of change who you are or be less anxious about going to networking events and stuff. But I will say that a lot of times it is all about just sort of being present in terms of being there, right? So my great example is always like, everyone goes to conferences, and there's always a point in a conference where you're like, well, like I should go and like have dinner with these guys or go to this other thing and talk to these folks, but I'm just going to go up to my room and watch HBO on the hotel room, right? So like everyone's been there, but you never know who you're going to meet if you just take the time to, go out and be present. A great example that I had is I had some tickets to an event that I couldn't use, and I was encouraging a set of my students who had just started a business to go to the event. They were tired and they had just gotten over some disappointment in terms of talking with some investors, but I really encouraged them just to go, partly because like I had paid for these tickets. But they went, and lo and behold, they actually met someone who ended up being an investor in their company. And had they not gone there, like we would, like, this is a person that we would not otherwise have known had they not been to this event. So again, you never know. So like, think about just in terms of, not even just in terms of networking, but just in terms of like, life in general. If you don't show up, you can't win the game. I'm going to close up by just throwing out some real-world examples of some of these things that we're talking about and how you might apply them in general. So, for example, like I thought about like how you guys might use these sort of networks that you have. So, as an example, if I connected with Leanne and I really wanted to talk to Deborah Darrow, but I had no connection with her, Leanne gave me Deborah's email address. I might send an easy email like this, no more than like 2 or 3 lines that says, hey, I'm a current student at the University of Chicago. I came across your profile on LinkedIn. You look like you have a great, professional background. Do you have 10 to 15 minutes to talk to me, right? Most of the time, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, if you say that you're a current student, working there, an alum or someone with that affiliation will take the 10 to 15 minutes to talk to you. I'd say probably even like, 30 to 50% of the time, if you just say you're a student anywhere, someone will actually spend time and chat with you. So while you're still students, take that as a note of a way to quickly connect with folks. If we go to the next example, this is actually a note that I got from, I think actually on LinkedIn. It doesn't take much. It's just, hey, Jerry, I hope this note finds you well. This is a person that I think was my neighbor, so I haven't really talked to them closely. But, it says, I'm reaching out because I see the University of Chicago is hiring for this position. Do you have any inside information? So sending an email like this is not, again, not a big deal. I don't take any offense or anything. If I can help this person, I will. If I can't, no skin off my back, right? So again, this is an example of a note that you might be able to send to one of your connections in order to further your career or make a connection to further your research or things in different areas. If we go to the next example, so here's an example of me introducing 2 people within my network. So I actually, so Jim is somebody who works at a startup company. I know him well. He trusts me, and he says, any interested people who might be interested in working at my company, please connect me. I met this girl, Akila. She's a recent grad, and she's looking for stuff that, and I think she might be a good fit for Jim's company. So, yeah, I put a nice little note that says, hey, intro to Akila. She's a recent grad. She wants to do some things that you're interested in. Jim, I think she'll be a good connection for you. So I would also just caution you in terms of, like, sometimes people don't like you to do this. So another way that I might have done this would be to email Jim first and say, like, hey, I got this person named Akila who has his resume. Would you like to take a look? And if he said yes, then I can make a connection. But, you know, you get to a point where your network trusts you, and so you sort of leapfrog it and go for these examples. So I think that's pretty much it for me. In closing, I would just say that, you know, I don't think that people necessarily need to be like prodigious networkers, but just, you know, network within the confines of what you have available. And I think if you're take a little bit of time to be thoughtful about it, it can be very beneficial to your career.
Thank you, Jerry. This is Leanne, everybody. Hey, one question that we got was, could you just talk just a little bit about how you go about networking when there's a real, like, power differential? Like, I know in your work, like, when you go visit businesses and you see the, you know, CEO of Google or whatever, you know, some really fancy person. And in the academic world, that would be like going to a conference and, you know, it'd be the speaker be, you know, the person who's been studying something for 40 years and everybody knows who they are and they have, you know, 4,000 articles about it. How do you network? What would be your suggestion from your experience about how you would network with that kind of a person?
Right. First off, I would say, you know, it does depend on sort of the culture of your field. So if you're in a very hierarchical field, it may be a little bit different. But in general, in the business world, most people are very open to talking to almost anyone for basically this reason that, like, you know, networking is important. I think in terms of talking to someone who's like a CEO or like an important person or is a celebrity or whatnot, I usually take the approach that, like, have something to say that makes a difference and plays to their ego in the sense of, like, hey, you know, I just saw you talk at this thing. It was great. You know, I just wanted to let you know that I think your research in, you know, drinking beverages is wonderful. So I would say, in terms of actually just making that connection, in terms of meeting somebody, I think is probably not as difficult as most of you would think. I would think the follow-on to that might be a little bit more difficult, right? In terms of, like, you know, I probably shouldn't just email Brian Samuels to say, hey, Brian, just checking in, how's it going? You know, I should probably think about something more important when I talk to him. So I would say the initial contact, it's probably, you know, not as big a deal as you're making out. The follow-up is probably where you have to think about it a little bit more.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to, I guess, next is Katie.
Yeah, I think that we will answer additional questions. We'll hold those, and we will turn things over to Katie.
Hello, everyone, and I'm just checking in again because I have placed the phone in a different spot. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, can hear you very well.
Okay, fabulous. I am really pleased to be here with you all today, and I am just going to kind of share my journey to how I got to having a career that is incredibly fulfilling and everything I never knew I wanted. And then that's what I'm going to cover on this slide. So I'll be on this slide for a while. And then on the next one, I'll give you tips that are based solely on my own personal experience. So I really look forward to the chance to connect with you all at the end via questions to see if any of this resonates with you or if you have a different perspective on some of the advice that I've given. So go ahead and click, Sarah. So as she mentioned, and it says on the slide, I'm a cohort 4 fellow. Oh, there we go. Oh, well, they're not going to line up perfectly, but it's totally fine. So I have my PhD in Family Studies and Human Development from the University of Arizona, which I completed in 2016. And I put up Extension and Early Head Start, EHS, just to give you guys an example of the type of work that I do and the worlds that I've circulated in while I was doing my PhD. So some of the networking that I did within that experience was getting connected to other early Head Start scholars. And that may seem kind of obvious, but that was a really important first step for me as a graduate student. Extension is the outreach arm of the college. So that allowed me to get valuable experiences working in applied settings. So working within communities with project managers, people who were running these family support centers, and really allowed me to get the experiences that I wanted to have. Go ahead and click. So in my timeline, I always knew that I wanted to do applied research with low-income families with young kids, preferably kids birth to 3, but I had no idea what career I was going to do when I was done. All I knew is that I wanted it to be policy relevant. I wanted to have an impact on the national stage, and I really knew that I wanted to do research 100% of the time. So I knew that a professorship was not in the cards for me. It was just not going to be the right fit. When I was done, as I was nearing the end of my PhD, I had a lot of anxiety about what was going to happen next, and I can make this a long story short, but I'll come back to the networking piece. I ended up in a wonderful postdoc at the University of Texas. It was in both family studies and the POP Center, so I got to work a lot more alongside sociologists and public health folks. And I basically got to be a professional stats nerd for a year, which was wonderful, just absolutely my heart's desire. So it was during this time that I really tried to get to know who I was and really what I wanted. And I knew that I wanted, as I mentioned, that applied work, but I also knew that I loved quantitative methods. So we'll come back to that in a minute, and I'll tell you how. Well, actually, no, let's move on to, go ahead and click. I forgot I do have all these animations set up to help me with my story. So after doing that for about 6 months, the postdoc was a wonderful time for me to get clarity on what I wanted. So all of this that I'm talking about so far is very much like me and my internal experience, and I'll bring in the networking soon. After about 6 months, I was able to identify that my dream career was at a place like a Mathematica, SRI, or a Child Trend. And that was because I thought really carefully about, what do I want to do every day? What are the colleagues that I want to have? What's the work that I want to produce? And I wanted it to have national and state policy relevance. I wanted to work alongside both researchers and state administrators. Through my networks, which I'll come back to in a moment, I was able to obtain an absolute dream job at Child Trends, where I get to do early childhood research and policy analysis 100% of my time. When I find that when I tell my story of how I ended up where I am, it sounds really linear, and I want to promise you, especially if you are an anxious PhD student, that it was not linear. It did not feel linear in the moment, but the way that I look back and tell my story, it sounds like there's a pretty common thread. So go ahead and click again. I used my network to get me from each of these steps, but it wasn't totally strategic. It's not like I knew that I wanted to go to UT. It's not that I even knew that the Population Research Center existed. But when I was at the University of Arizona, there was a professor there named Stephen Russell. Stephen Russell is completely outside of my area. He studies adolescents, LGBTQ adolescents. And but he was in my department, and he was very good friends with my advisor. And Stephen Russell ended up moving on to UT to be the chair of their department the year that I was finishing my degree. And so when the postdoc opportunity came around, was posted on a listserv that I saw for this NSF-funded postdoc at UT, I immediately reached out to Stephen. So even though I had a personal relationship with Stephen, because we were in the same department, he really didn't know my work. So there was something that Jerry said about the secondary connections and how important they are. So Stephen relied on talking to my advisor to learn about my strengths And then he went to the two people who would eventually become my postdoc mentors, had coffee with them, and was like, yeah, Katie's great. I have to say that this Jerry's right. This is how you get the majority of jobs, is you do need to have something that takes your CV and puts it on the top of the pile. So this, sometimes I would have I'm just going to be very real, I'd have kind of imposter syndrome around this. Being a Pop Center postdoc is a very coveted position, and they hired 2 of us and over 80 people applied. And I have this feeling like, maybe I don't deserve to be here. You know, maybe it was just the connection, but that turned out to not be true. And my connections were very truthful in their assessment of my skills. And it really did turn out to be a great fit. So that's how my connections got me from my PhD to my postdoc. And then click again, you'll see, I'll just quickly discuss how I use networking to get me all the way to my career. So one of the threads that started in my PhD program is my mentor had connections with a woman who was one of the original study designers of the big early Head Start impact study. She came and gave a talk my first year in grad school, and that's how I got connected to that data that I ended up using for my dissertation. That woman's name is Kathy Ayub, and she's at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, which is part of Harvard Medical School. The summer between my 4th and 5th year in graduate school, I went and did an unpaid internship with her, I did that because I wanted her data for my dissertation. So I did have this kind of ulterior motive. But while I was there that summer, I met a woman named Jess Bartlett. Jess ended up moving on at the end of that summer to Child Trends. And so that seed that was planted, like my very first year in graduate school, by having Kathy Ayub come to our department, give a talk, she introduced me to a data set that not only became like this huge catalyst in my career, but it ended up with me meeting the woman who would then be very instrumental in helping me get my job at Child Trends. So once I had identified that Child Trends was really the type of place that I wanted to work, I reached out to Jess and I said, hey, remember me? We used to work on things last year. And I'd love to talk with you about what are you learning at Child Trends, and tell me about your experience, and do you think I would be a good fit for it? Because she and I had worked closely together for a couple of months. She was very generous with her time. She talked with me at SRCD and introduced me to multiple colleagues. She put me in email contact. So by the time that I actually applied and interviewed, nearly everyone knew my name. I sounded familiar, and that puts people's guards down. I will just say, maybe this is true at other places, but I later found out that part of the motivation for Jess being so generous with her time is Child Trends does give employees incentive if they refer people and those people take jobs. That might be true at other research institutions. So even more reason to not be afraid to reach out to people is we love hiring people that have been referred to us by our own employees. In fact, 75% of the people that come to work for us have been referred. Go ahead and click. Hopefully this will take us, to my big advice slide. After now you know way too much about me. Here's some concrete pieces of advice, organized as only a developmental scientist would, with an ecological systems theory of networking. Go ahead and click. At the big macro level, I would say that what I did that was successful for me is I told anyone who would listen what I was interested in. It didn't matter if they studied adolescence. It didn't matter where they were. If I was having a conversation with someone and it came up, it felt like, oh, maybe this is an opportunity for me to just share my future. And certainly when you're a postdoc or you're in the last year of your PhD, it's all anyone can talk to you about. They ask you, what are you going to do next? And I didn't have a clear idea. I didn't know that Child Trends was where I wanted, and I didn't even know that a large research organization like that was what I wanted. So I would just tell people, I really want to do work that's policy relevant for low-income families with infants and toddlers. And if I went to a session that was really interesting, and I would think, ooh, I want to do work like what that person is doing, I would go up to them and say that. And I would say, how did you get to do this? And I just started gathering people's stories of how they got to where they were. And I started telling people what I was interested in, and they would give me their reflections. That's part of the reason why I chose Child Trends. everyone who I would say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, they would all say, oh man, you know where you need to work? Child trends. Go ahead and click. The other big piece of this is finding a community. So in my journey to figure out what my ideal career and research line would be, I found that the most important thing was not my introspectiveness. That's kind of, I feel like, how I portrayed it on slide 1. It wasn't me sitting alone in my room trying to figure out what I wanted. It was finding peers who were on my similar level, really early career or ready to jump into their first careers, who had similar aspirations. So we could bounce ideas off of each other. Building that community was really empowering and is very important, and I'm moving forward with that. A lot of those peers are my peers from the Doris Duke Network. We still publish together. We still go to conferences together. We're still organizing interesting ideas for the future. We're letting things percolate together, and our careers are in a similar trajectory, and it feels really good. It helps combat the imposter syndrome. Click. I think Jerry mentioned this a little bit, but there's something to be said for, don't wait to be invited. Ask. If there is an interesting meeting or convening or brown bag or affinity group discussion at a conference, ask if you can go. See if it's interesting to you. And if it's not interesting, then you never have to go again, and you don't have to obligate yourself to anything. But I think it's helpful, especially if you can find those peers that are going to lift you up and build your confidence, then walk into the spaces that you want to be a part of and ask to be a part of them. Click. Finally, also following up on Jerry's concrete ideas of what you should do, people, surprisingly, I say that jokingly, love to talk about themselves. If you ask someone for an informational interview where you learn about their career trajectory, how they got to be there, they will love it. They will eat it up. That's what I've typically found. And if they don't have the time, then they'll just tell you. If they don't have the interest, they'll tell you that they don't have time. Nobody's going to be mean to you. Offer to take people out for coffee. If you offer to buy someone coffee or lunch, they're much more likely to do that. If you're going to do that before a conference, give people 3 to 4 weeks of heads up, because people start to make their conference schedules. That's a great time to do it. Say, hey, can I buy you breakfast? I'd love to talk with you more about your workplace, your career trajectory. And everyone I've talked to, friends as well as employers, if you ask, can I please have an informational interview, they'll do their best to get you one. And you will learn a lot. You'll learn a lot about yourself, and you'll learn a lot about that workplace. So I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to Megan to hear about her career in networking. Oh yeah, and that's just my life advice, is be confident in yourself. You all have a lot to contribute.
Nice. Hello, everyone. I am Megan Hayes Peel. And actually, I can see very much why they paired Katie and I to talk about some of our experiences with networking with you, because I had a little bit different of a trajectory in terms of my career. But I have some similar experiences and some similar tips to what Katie talked about, and also what Jerry initially talked about too. To give you a little bit of background on me, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Wayne State University. The bulk of my research is focused on mental health and post-secondary education for youth aging out of foster care, and really looking at how intervention during those stages can help with the prevention of the intergenerational transmission of child abuse and neglect. So where I started, I also came from the great state of Arizona, but I was at the other school, Arizona State University, in the School of Social Work. So that's where I got my PhD. That's where I worked in practice before I went back for my doctorate. So I started out with some relationships in the community, and I did primary data collection for my dissertation research. So some of those relationships that I already had were really helpful, and then I continued to build relationships based on the academic mentors that I had at my university, and even the social capital that I had built within the community and at my university, connecting to their networks as well. When I went on the job market, I really utilized, and I didn't realize how helpful my network of Doris Duke Fellows would be in terms of finding jobs and finding out different information about schools and just talking informally with folks and making some of those connections. The schools that I actually had campus visits at were all schools where there was another Doris Duke Fellow, so that was really helpful in getting some information. And actually, when Jerry was talking about being present, that actually resonated with me because the way I found out about the position at Wayne State University was at a national conference, and it was a special interest group that actually I didn't attend. I chose to go to a different special interest group, but 3 of my Doris Duke Fellows in different cohorts attended a particular special interest group where someone announced they were looking for a child welfare researcher in the School of Social Work at Wayne State. So I wasn't present in that special interest group, but my connections with other fellows, they came back and told me, and then I was able to connect and kind of go through that process to end up where I'm at now. So I went from my PhD straight into a tenure track academic position. So a little bit different, but some similar networking things as well. Can you click to the next slide, please? So being a part of the fellowship has really expanded my networks, and it sounds a little cheesy, but my networks are stronger and broader than I ever anticipated that they would be before, and even while I was in the fellowship. So these are some suggestions that I have, things that work for me. Hopefully you find some of them useful, and again, some of them overlap. The first one is just really considering the broader network of fellows. So you have the cohort above you, the cohort that you're in, the cohort below you that you tend to connect with in the September meetings, and even at the mid-year meeting, but really thinking about not just connecting with those fellows, but also their networks. So their policy mentors, their academic mentors. Everyone involved in this fellowship is so invested in you and your success and the success of the fellowship overall that they're more than happy if you reach out to either a fellow and ask to connect to their mentor, or even I've directly reached out to some mentors before and said, hey, I'm a Doris Duke Fellow. I'd really love to chat with you about your research in this particular area. So considering kind of the span of this broader network of fellows is really important. And as I mentioned, it was really helpful when I was on the job market too. The second thing that I think is helpful is to attend the Doris Duke mid-year meeting, even after your 2 years in the fellowship are finished, but attending as an alum or a graduated fellow. I actually think my networks have gotten stronger since I've graduated and continued to come back to these meetings. One, I think I always leave the meeting so energized or re-energized about the work that we're all doing and moving this field forward. And then I'm able to connect with fellows in several different cohorts that are attending that mid-year meeting. So that's something that's been really helpful for me and something that I look forward to every year. I'm also on the sustainability committee, and Katie's on the committee with me as well. In terms of looking at how do we organize folks and how do we keep fellows being able to connect in person, because I think there's something different about connecting with folks by email or over the phone as when you're actually able to sit down and have a conversation with somebody in person. And so definitely seeing the value of those in-person meetings. We've been trying to find ways to continue organizing fellows outside of the mid-year meeting at different conferences that are interdisciplinary too. Another tip that I would give is to take the opportunities to share your work and your research interests. So when Sarah or someone reaches out, do you have any updates for the newsletter, or would you be interested in contributing to our blog post on the website? I absolutely tried to take every opportunity I had to share the work that I was doing. And I often had people reach out to me just based on reading the newsletter, or someone read the newsletter and shared that with a colleague who then reached out to me. So I think just getting that exposure to your work is really helpful. I would also recommend, as has been mentioned, attending conferences and really attending multiple conferences. So early in your career especially, but also as a graduate student. I know conferences, money can be a challenge in terms of attending those conferences, but if there's any way that you can find ways to make it work, I think just your presence at those conferences and even seeing how people interact and network at those conferences is really helpful. My next bullet actually is related to this, in terms of connecting with graduate and professional student associations at your university. So they often have professional development webinars and activities, but I found that mine had a lot of funding set aside for students that didn't often get taken advantage of. So I actually tapped into quite a bit of travel funding every year so that I could attend typically 2 conferences a year as a grad student, or national conferences. So looking at ways to connect and seek out funding within your university to try and provide those networking opportunities. The other thing that was helpful for me with the Graduate and Professional Student Association was that I started serving as a reviewer for grants, for travel funding, for teaching awards, so research grants and pilot grants. And that really helped me understand their evaluation criteria and what they were looking for so I could apply and successfully get some of those grants. But it also put my name out there so that when I did apply for those grants, they recognized my name, and I think that helped me be successful in that area as well. After you've graduated and moved on to your fabulous career, whether that's in academia or not, I definitely see the value in hitting the ground running with your community partners. And maybe that's self-explanatory, and maybe it's something you've already been thinking about, but being really intentional about it is important. I think back when I was finishing my dissertation, I had those relationships in the community where I had been working on my PhD for a few years, I'd been in practice, but now I was moving to a different state, different community, different state system, in which I really had to start building those relationships, often from scratch in some cases. So some of the things that I did, I reached out to a colleague within my department before I started the job, so over the summer, talking about a grant proposal. I also reached out to the school and found out what relationships they currently had with different child and family serving agencies and the state agency to know what relationships already existed and where should I start kind of my efforts as well. I also found that was something really important to bring up in my job talks, and identifying community partners to let them know that I'd thought that through. And I think people really appreciated just the intentionality in talking about hitting the ground running once you get to a new community. And then my last point is really related to being present, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. Some folks are really comfortable just walking up to someone they don't know and starting a conversation. For me, that gets tougher when I find out how famous that person is or how important they are in the field. And so I think pushing yourself to have some of those conversations. And as Jerry said, it doesn't have to be, you know, a really long email that you're reaching out, or you can just kind of start that conversation, ask people about their research. People like to talk about themselves. We've mentioned a couple of times. And also, I think sometimes when we're really busy, we tend to not push outside of our comfort zone and make those extra steps to network. So it's something I think, again, to be really intentional about. So those are the tips that I have. And then I think we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your advice for all of us. I have learned so much. This has been so great. Yes, let's open the floor to questions. Looks like we have a few in our question box. So I may ask Nikki to read some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. This is Nikki. So one question we got is about, this probably would be for Jerry, about LinkedIn etiquette. You know, as most of us probably see, we get some connections that come in that may make sense or may be related to our industry, but some where we just don't know them at all. Is it good to still connect with those individuals, or is there a clear connection that's needed?
Yeah, I think it really depends, and it kind of depends on your personal strategy for LinkedIn. I know there are people that will link with anybody or link with anybody in a tangential sort of field or industry. My personal view is that I usually don't link with somebody unless I know them personally. And so, like, if I was comfortable, like, you know, introducing them to one of you guys who I also know, I probably would be willing to link to them. But if not, like, then I usually wouldn't link to them. I do get some requests sometime where I don't know the person, but I am kind of curious, so I might follow up outside of LinkedIn on email. Eventually, I might link to them, but it doesn't mean that I only can link to them on LinkedIn. I can still talk to them otherwise.
Similar to LinkedIn, there's a question here about ResearchGate and like Google Scholar. Katie and Megan, can you talk about that? What are all the different platforms that you're on where you keep an updated profile? Do you feel like those online platforms have been useful to you in maintaining your network and getting word out about who you are and the kind of research that you're involved in?
This is Katie, and my knee-jerk reaction is I don't know that they've been very helpful for networking. I think that I really have all I know is I've never gotten comments or notes from people that I've then gone on to have collaborations with. I've had like people from foreign universities ask me for full text copies of my publications. That's my main thing. And the only reason why I have a pretty strong internet profile presence. I have my own website that I made through Squarespace. I have the ResearchGate. I've got all of it. Is because I wanted when employers, and especially because I was going for non-academic jobs, when employers Googled me, I wanted them to have a very clear sense of who I was, and I wanted an internet presence that was very professional. So that's why I engage in all of those, and I keep my Google Scholar profile updated and all that stuff.
This is Megan. I also use ResearchGate and Google Scholar. And I think I've started to see more utility in those in the last couple of years. And I think it doesn't necessarily matter what platform you choose. I think some of that's discipline specific maybe, or even occupation specific. But I think whatever platform you choose, make sure that you keep it updated. I have had some folks reach out to me through ResearchGate. And then after conferences, I tend to see folks following me on ResearchGate, or maybe it's an opportunity for me to reach out to someone on ResearchGate, because if I request to follow them, they get that notification and can choose to follow me back, I guess. So that's also kind of an informal way to connect with people as well. So again, I think it's as useful as you make it in terms of updating it, and also just connecting with folks on it.
And I want to add also to that, Twitter, especially, I mean, we're all Doris Duke Fellows because we care about policy relevant work and applied work. And that is a great way to expand your network to include journalists who might contact you to cover your work. That's actually how a lot of child trans people end up getting picked up by news wires, is because they're sharing their research over these channels, and they're doing it in an appropriate, in a nonpartisan sort of way. But that's how you can network with people who are outside of academia to really kind of get some traction. If you want policy traction or news traction to your work, or you want clinicians to actually read it, because a lot of doctors and nurses and social workers are looking to Twitter for information.
Very good point. This is not a question that came in, but it's something that I just was thinking about throughout the presentation. I'm just really glad that all three of you sort of touched upon being present, showing up. You know, I'm pretty extroverted, but I still think that I'm uncomfortable in social situations sometimes, because I do think I have imposter syndrome of like, I'm so young, you know, I just have a master's degree, I don't have a PhD, or what can I possibly offer to this conversation? And it was just great to hear you all talk about how you have pushed past that and thought, hey, I really do have something to offer here, or at least something to learn. Is there like a little pep talk you give yourself when you're revving yourself up to go into situations where you are a little anxious or things like that? Or is it just that mantra that you hold within yourself of like, I have something to offer, and that's how you move forward?
This is Jerry. I'll throw out that usually I just take the attitude that it doesn't matter. So like, you know, most people don't know me, so if I meet them for the first time and they don't like me or whatever, it's no skin off my back. It doesn't matter.
I love that.
I give myself a talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes before, and like I said, I still get it. It depends on the situation and the context. I think it gets easier as you have more research out there and you're presenting at conferences more, and people are seeing the work that you're doing and associating your name with it. But I think there are still some people that I've introduced myself to 4 or 5 times and they don't necessarily know who I am. So I think just continuing to put yourself out there is important. And that those relationships change as you progress in your career too, I think.
I liked Jerry's advice of have something to say, which sounds no duh, but oftentimes you just kind of want to meet someone because they're your academic hero, right? So having something, some specific, like I always think about the conference talk and you went to go hear them, have some specific question or piece of it that you can talk with them about. Say, wow, you raised this really important issue and I'd love someday in my career to directly address that. You know, what else have you been thinking about? Or if you have some specific question about something that they raised, that always helps me feel more confident because then I feel like I have something to say other than I love you, you know? So it makes me feel better.
Thank you all so much for answering these questions and for being with us on the webinar. We have recorded this webinar and we'll share slides and recording with you all soon. And if you have any questions, I know Jerry shared his email in these slides, and I'm pretty confident that Katie and Megan also would be very happy to connect with you at the mid-year meeting or just in the future over email or in person. So thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks. Bye.